command of the 552 Missile Battalion. He had several incidences in the desert. One of them is a cave that the GI showed him that was there, and it was always animals, had water in the cave, and it was a cool place to go out of the desert. And often many of the men would go up there and himself on, just for excursion and something to do. You got to understand, Red Canyon is very isolated from there's no stores or anything around. They built a church there, which I think was highly interesting. Later on, there's a story that involves that. But anyway, he went to this cave, and when he was in the cave, he tells the story of the first meeting with the alien in the cave. He said he was kind of laying back, sleeping, relaxing, dozing off, and all of a sudden he rolled over and pulled his gun. They always wore their gun whenever they were off their post up there. And he pulled the gun and he pointed it toward this form, he says. He didn't recognize what the form was. So he asked, he says, friend or foe? The form said neither. But he was very, very upset because the message came mentally, and he figures, how in the heck is this thing, and what is it doing? He later sees it move a little bit, and he sees that it has a type of helmet on with a type of stone in the center of its head on a band. He drew pictures of it, or had an artist draw it. This creature asked him to shut down his radars for 15 minutes. He says that he figured in his head, how does this thing know that I'm the only person that could give that command to shut these radars down? He asked the creature, well, why should I do it, or what's in it for me? The creature answered, a new world if you can take it. At the time, that had little to no meaning to him. Only in later days did it have a meaning to it. He went out of the cave, called Sergeant Rexack, told him to shut down the radars, and he says that as he was leaving the cave, he sees the creature standing in the end of the cave, and he does kind of a gesture with his hand, which wasn't a salute or wasn't a wave or anything, but he saluted it back. And that was basically the end of the encounter there. He's on his radars. They picked up a ship moving over 3,000 miles an hour through the atmosphere. It went down near Red Canyon. So he had a light airplane then, and he got the pilot. He flew up, looked around, and he saw a shiny object on the ground. He figured that he would investigate closer by himself, so he landed, did not take anybody with him, got one of the old staff cars, went out into the desert, and he says he found the craft. And he says it was perfectly smooth. It was oval shaped, more like a cigar than a saucer, stuck into a side or resting against a rock sideways. He said this thing would fade out completely and then fade back in. He thought he was hallucinating, and he couldn't figure this out, what was going on. He was scared to death, he says. But he managed to take a tumbleweave and throw under it when it was faded, when it was gone, just to see if he was hallucinating or if it was real. It came back again. He says that he touched it. It was cool to the touch on the side. He says when it disappeared again or went back out of phase again, the tumbleweed was crushed, so he knew it was physical. He said there were footprints around the craft. I always felt like there was more there that he hasn't told, just my personal feeling, because you don't see footprints in the craft, I don't think, without having a second encounter. But that's my own personal view. He says the ship began to vibrate. He says he got scared. He jumped back in the staff car, threw it in reverse. It went flying backwards, and he says the motor stalled. He said he saw the thing rise up, turn, and go up into the air, and then it went into an envelope that it kind of imploded into. And he says later on he told von Braun about it, he told Olbert about it, which were on his scientific teams later on. He knew them because he was in charge of Operation Paperclip for President Eisenhower. So, you know, this is a man of credentials telling a story like this. My wife and I always said this story is bull, you know, are we to believe him? And this, I must say this about my father. When you see his presence on film, and if you knew my father for only a few minutes, he never would change his story. He would never make the fish longer. When he told the story, he would tell it in front of anybody. He didn't care who they were, credibility, credentials, or whatever. He would tell it the same as he would tell any other story about MIAs or so like that, or, you know, such. They would do research for the White House. They were part of Operation Paperclip. They would do research on, for instance, if you want to know one of them, but my dad was a declassifying officer on, is Project Horizon. See, President Kennedy really didn't do such a great thing when he said we're going to send a moon landing by whenever it was, 1967, or whenever he promised us, or the end of the 1969. That had actually all been proposed in Project Horizon. Obviously, I would say that the president probably knew about this because it was classified at the time. Later on, when it was put into the book, my dad was the declassifying officer on that, so he knew it was to put on. I remember seeing that as a boy by accident. I picked it up on his desk one day, and it was about an inch thick, and it had all color photos in it. And I said, wow, look at this space stuff, you know. And of course, I didn't know what it was, if it was a fiction book or what it was, but I do remember seeing it. He speaks of a man named Wilbur Smith, which was a great investigator of UFOs and phenomena, and built a lot of machinery for magnetism and, you know, along the Tesla lines. That was Canadian. He was disgraced. Dad says later on, Dad exchanged medals with him in the 60s. Of course, Dad has discussed this issue with many politicians. He discussed this issue with, of course, Strom Thurmond. He discussed this issue with the CIA Director J. Edgar Hoover. He's the FBI. FBI, I'm sorry, yeah. He discussed this also with CIA leaders. I don't know who they were, but he says really all branches of the services and the intelligence community. He briefed several of the chiefs of staff. They did keep the information from several presidents. They figured that they just did not have the matrix to be briefed on this subject. One was Carter. He would never know, they said. And there was actually a group of about 30. Now, don't pin this number to an exact number, but he said it's about 30 key generals and key military and key congressional people, such as he briefed John McCormick, Speaker of the House. I was actually under his patronage for a while. I worked on Capitol Hill as a Capitol policeman and as a page. And he briefed these people. He briefs Senator Strom Thurmond. Another congressman that Dad was very close to was John Feehan from Ohio. He briefed him. Why did they brief these certain people? It was part of my dad's agenda and others at the time to keep knowledge and secret and to let knowledge out in certain areas. And this was more or less a community of friends. There were many generals involved in this, and their pack was the last to die could tell. And the last that did die, you're blinking red, the last that did die was, of course, General Trudeau. And then my father told everything after General Trudeau. But if you notice, there was never a word said before 1992. My father was on the National Security Council as he wasn't, now this is a part here that becomes, Freeman raised a question, and it became very controversial when it should not have been. My father was not on the council, but he was an advisor to the council for the president. In other words, there's many advisors that sit in on council meetings, and they just sit back and take notes and then report back to the president. As far as being listed as part of the council, no, he was not. And why a big deal? Well, let's not go there. It just wasn't necessary. But to answer your question, I'm going to tell this in my words. These weren't exactly my dad's words. I tried to keep his words pure, but it went something like this. Eisenhower, he says, asked him where these creatures were from. I'm speaking of Roswell. Dad says, we don't know. He says, what do they want? He said, we don't know that either. So Ike, he said, well, Corso, what's your opinion? What should we say about it? And Dad says the answer to Ike was, look, we're old military men. Let's just say nothing. But it did penetrate our airspace, so we have to treat them as foe. And so the cover-up, or whatever you want to call it, began. My father says there was never a cover-up, never intended to be a cover-up. But with all these agencies, and with the White House not wanting to say anything, it certainly shortly got written into mandate to be a cover-up. And that's how my father says, for instance, the government doesn't need to cover itself up. It's so inefficient, it'll do it itself. But as you can see, this is developing a pattern. It wasn't just chance that my father was put in research and development in 1960 under foreign technology, because this is now the second time in the government, or a second time that since he was in the career, you might say, from Fort Riley to Eisenhower to General Trudeau. This was no accident, because you can see that Eisenhower was also another very important president that had this information and knew of this information. My dad says he knew of the information. What type of technologies and how were they transferred? I go back to where Dad first inherited the file. The file General Trudeau had brought up as soon as he took his job, had it brought up from the basements of the Pentagon. This file had a lock on it, just like in our website. We tried to duplicate it. That's a 4-drawer, and it was a 3-drawer he speaks of on the films. It had materials in it. It had classified files in it. It had files on the Philadelphia experiment. It had files on many other government issues besides Roswell. But it did have some artifacts in it. These artifacts, my father said, there was actually a file that briefed where the artifacts came from, and it was indeed Roswell, 1947, July 4th. And these artifacts were, he speaks of laying 3 of them on a triangle on his desk, and General Trudeau walking in and saying, oh, what's that junk on your desk? You know, and Dad would say, well, you know, these could change the world. And General Trudeau would say, yes, I know, and we just hope that people that come afterwards will know what to do with these. It first was a piece of metal, and this metal was kind of different because it couldn't be penetrated, folded, creased, or sealed. But when they sent it to one of the laboratories, I remember Dad saying they put a certain frequency and current to it, and it became transparent, and it passed energy through it, and it could be cut and destroyed in. Another object that he had was the first integrated circuit. More than an integrated circuit, though. It was a wafer, a multi-stacked wafer with a kind of a prom window in the middle of it, partially burned on one end. Now this is the interesting part. My father says by him concentrating on that, he could make it glow. It would glow a blue light. He also had fiber optics laying there. They didn't know what these things were. They figured they were wires of some sort, but didn't know how they operate. The interesting thing that shows you that we have not achieved a point of where these fiber optics are is my dad would also hold them in his hand, and when he closed his hand around them, the ends would be glowing. So this means they contain their own energy. So, you know, we haven't reached this state yet of understanding how materials can atomically align and become, you know, opaque and such from that. One of the things that General Trudeau did say to my father, though, was after they analyzed the metal, was that an alignment of atoms, anytime my dad had any hint of it, he would take the team of Olbert and all of the Germans and scientific team and go to this facility instantly, because General Trudeau said that would be bigger than Los Alamos. There were other items. He spoke of an item that was moved over the human body that went to either John Hopkins or Walter Reed. He never saw it again. He said it also couldn't be opened, such. He had the first laser in his hand. They didn't know what it was. And he tells the story on film that he thought it was a flashlight and the batteries were dead. So he had no idea what this thing was. But when they put it to Fort Belvoir and they put the energies and currents to it and this and that, the first laser appeared. But he says that the characteristic of this laser is nothing like we have today. It was molecule size. He was sorry he wrote the book. He was sorry he exposed the family to the ridicule, to the lawsuits. It's been very tough on our entire family. He did not want to die, leaving us with these problems. We were very fortunate to find an angel, a true angel, in Mr. Kent. If it wasn't for this man, I certainly would not be sitting in this front of this camera now. Just hope that the future people such as yourself and me will know what to do with this type of knowledge that this man brought forward. I do say that he is the first man to come forward in a high capacity, and possibly it will start to snowball going down the hill, getting larger and larger. I certainly hope so, because I'm sure then he would be looking down and be proud of us. Of course, the paramount company would be Bell Laboratories. As most of you know about the lawsuit between American Computer and Bell Laboratories, and no previous history of invented the integrated circuit. Now, let me set something straight for the record. I'm doing like my father did. I must be a product of him. The transistor is an Earth invention. Okay, and people say, yes, it did come in 1948, began this research on it and this and that. It has nothing to do with the integrated circuit, except for that it is solid state and it did begin the technology. And as they would plant some of this technology, such as night vision, they would plant this technology into areas that were already existing, already working on these areas. For instance, there was an infrared night viewing device or such that came from German technology at Fort Belvoir. Well, that would be the natural place to take the lens from one of the aliens' eyes. And Dad says when they held it up in the hallway, they could see movements in the background of soldiers or people moving and such. Now, it again contained its own energy, nothing like we have today. So they planted these R&D projects in already existing. Now, they didn't plant the artifact. That's a big misconception too. They gave them a procurement, they gave them the funding, they gave them the what to develop toward, and then they would insert from their own laboratories certain knowledges to keep them going on the right path, to keep them developing. And if it took the artifact to get the final product, they did this. And it wasn't being done benevolently. It wasn't being done. It was being done for the Army's own advantage over the other services and over our enemies and such like that. There was no, reason that the public deserved it or the human beings or kindness or such like that. It was strictly a military operation. He says that the Air Force had this material from Roswell, the ships, actually at Edwards Air Force Base, and that what they had was simply materials that were thrown into a Jeep. The reason he knows that, it was in the briefing file, in the file cabinet with the artifacts. Edwards Air Force Base. Now, Dad didn't tell that except for on his deathbed. I guess it's clear it was still classified. He had 9 levels above top secret. He was still, almost to his dying day, you could see him wavering between, sometimes he would say something and I would come back to him and he'd say, no, I never said that. For instance, he found a key. They couldn't get the ship opened up. So this is how I knew he was still in contact in later days, because they could not still analyze the ship. They had no way to open this ship. And he told me after he had his first heart attack that there was a key that they inserted, and lines, seams came out everywhere. The extraterrestrial looked like, the alien autopsy film? He was often asked if that was real. And he says, well, he can't testify whether it's real or not, but he says, let me tell you this. From an intelligence officer's standpoint, there's 3 items that whoever faked this film, if they did fake it, could not know. Number 1, there was no emphatic system. Number 2, it had 2 brains, 4 lobes. One of the brains was laced with ICs. Of course, that was not in the film, but it did have 2 films.
What's an IC?
Integrated circuit. The other part is that it had 3 eyelids. It had the outside one that was removable, had a membrane, and then the eyeball. So Dad says, whoever faked this, if they did fake it, had the same report that he had from Walter Reed. By the way, the autopsies were done at Walter Reed. He said that the EB was indeed part of the craft, integrated into the craft, and it was the propulsion system. Lack of a better word. There's really not a science to describe how the craft moved, but he said they knew it was integrated into the ship, and so were the other occupants of the ship, part of the guidance system, so on and so on. The ship was a living entity also.
How did he know that?
He knew that from the reports. They knew it died. It simply turned from blue to brown and died like a fish out of water, and so did the occupants shortly after. Now I'll tell you something about also the EB. He often spoke of a room in the Pentagon which you had it like a jail door, and you slid it back and you went in there and you were not able to take any pencil, paper, recording device or so, and you simply viewed documents and then you came out with whatever you could store in your head. Once or twice it led me to believe that there was something else that was kept in those rooms that would give information. He had a thread also that was from the clothing, and he says that the ship's skin, the alien's suit, silver suit, and his skin were all similar material. Absolutely, he was aware of other crashes. He says that the Germans told him that they had a crash, and that's where most of their technology and their advanced materials and their research, as we brought them here. And this was, part of a team that he worked with every day. He said there was another crash in 1957 in Corona. They knew that it was Stalin's #1 mandate to steal Roswell technology. So they began a operation to hide it. They felt that the CIA was infiltrated. They felt that their funding would be cut off, and they felt that there would be nothing done with this material if they did indeed leave a paper trail or such like that. Our family was shocked. I mean, we absolutely, were in disbelief that he could keep this a secret all these years. My mother would not be the type to even listen to anything like that. I'm sure that he didn't. I'm sure he never told another soul, except for people that were in the loop. He says that this group of 30 that were in charge of this technology, he says it wasn't a written mandate for them. They were simply hardened battlefield officers, and they had an oath among themselves. So I guess men that you die next to and that you fight next to, that oath is probably just as good as if you signed it with the Lord. So I know my father never talked to anyone about this stuff. I'm positive. He told me many, many times that there were no borders and have not been any borders. He say him and others that were in charge and political, they knew by 1983 we would become a user country. And that means we would consume about 90% of the world's goods, and we were a fattened cow and would keep consuming it. This is the way the economic system is set up. He schooled me that he was taught by 2 popes the meaning of money. That was a deal he had worked out with them for doing certain favors for them, Father O'Flaherty and 2 of the popes, Pope Pius, I think, the 12th, and John the 5th or so, but don't quote those. I'd have to look in his records to see that. No, I was always a product of his schooling without me knowing about it. And now I see why. Maybe I have a job to do. He knew of this, yes. He knew of MIAs, Korea. He knew quite a bit about Vietnam because, of course, him and Trudeau were going to go there. They were one of the candidates to take over the job. Yes, the world is entirely different than most people think it is. That came in later days when he told me that, after the book. He says the Vatican is indeed a very knowledgeable source. My dad knows of the MIAs that were left in Korea and why and how they were moved to Russia and he testified on open and closed Senate committees on this. He says that the main reason that this was done is, of course, because of our liberal views, our sympathizing with communist doctrine during the time, blackmail. And it's in my father's writings in detail.
And we did nothing.
Did nothing. Right now, there's no civilian machinery to handle another crash. If it happens again, it will simply go to the military, and it will probably be the same situation that happened in Roswell. Even though the time is different, I don't think the military agenda is any different. It will come under national security, and it will probably be the end of it. I think that we need a movement that we, as people of the earth and people of the universe, that if a ship does crash here again, which my father said will happen, that we can be in charge of that or have salvage rights. My father, after the book, he never knew John Glenn, but for some reason, I guess he thought he was very important. So he made a trip to Washington. There was another reason he made the trip, to see Jean Dixon. She was very sick, and he went in to see John Glenn. And he gave John Glenn a document on an automobile, lightweight automobile. Now, whether it was a lightweight, impractical, or whatever, I don't know the entire, but John Glenn, he gave him the brief on it. It was about a 1/4 inch thick. And it was from one of the laboratories that was funded. This is one of the items that came out of the Roswell crash that no one knows about until right now, except for the people that actually built and were in on the secret project. But someone might ask John Glenn if he remembers my dad's visitation. I think it was in '98. They would absolutely put the end to anyone that does that. That is something that has passed through many generations of our government. Not to be done. In fact, even Teller was good friends with my father, and they knew that also. How they knew it, I don't know. But he did make that prediction, and darn if it didn't happen. During the Reagan administration, I think when SDI was started, that it was a, he told me later, you know, after '92 when he wrote the book, he says that that was a planetary defense system, and that leaders of the, most of the leaders knew that at the time. See, the Cold War, talked about as a Cold War, and he says the meaning was that it was an extraterrestrial war. He says they were terrorizing military terrorizing citizens and interfering with military facilities.
I worked at Boeing Aircraft Company in Long Beach, California, and as a surface technician, working for the commercial side and military side of Boeing in Long Beach, California, formerly McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company. And I became interested in ham radio about 1980. And I got my ham radio license. And in 1987, I was scanning my ham radio, the frequency band, and I came across a conversation. Two people were in conversation, one in El Toro and one in Newport Beach, and they were talking about bombers and fighters. And the other person that was living, well, actually there were three people, one in Toluca Lake, which we are close to right now, and he was continuing to call him General. And you don't do that on ham radio. On CB radio you do that. They're called handles. And so I waited for them to clear out, and they went back to the gentleman in Toluca Lake and asked him why he was calling this person in Newport Beach General. And he told me that he would talk to me about that off the air, in which I then gave him my phone number. And at the time I was in Signal Hill, and I told him to give me 30 minutes to get home and to call me, in which he did. And he called me and he informed me that the reason why he was referring to the person in Newport Beach as General is because he was a general, and this was 4-star General and Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Curtis LeMay. Monitored the frequency for about 2 weeks. I waited for the right time to come in, and break in, and I talked to Curtis LeMay on the air. I took it upon myself to drive down there. I looked up his address using the FCC database in Long Beach, drove down to Newport Beach and rang his doorbell, electronic security gate, and his wife, Helen, let me in. And I was looking for the doorknob, and I couldn't find one because they didn't have a doorknob, and so I just grabbed the gate and went in, and as soon as I walked in the front door, there was a big bust of Curtis LeMay depicting him as Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And that blew me away right there, and then I knew this was Curtis LeMay. And we sat down and talked in his den. He put his feet up on his coffee table, which there were Air Force magazines sitting on top. And directly to our left was a picture of him in the White House with President Kennedy. Curtis LeMay was fully dressed in his uniform. And I asked Curtis LeMay, and I said, Kurt, and I said, when you were in the Air Force, out of the 100% of sightings that came into the Air Force, how many of them were not identified? And he said, out of the 100% that came in, only 35% of them could not be identified. And I asked him, well, why couldn't they have been identified? And he said, because the craft that are too damn fast, we can't catch them. In fact, he used some foul language in there too, in his explanation. And then I asked him about the Roswell crash, if that really occurred. And he looked over at me and he shook his head yes, that it did occur. And I said I was particularly interested in the strange writings that were found inside. And I said, were they ever deciphered? And he said, far as he understood, they were not deciphered when he was in office. And then I asked him about if he ever knew where these things were coming from, their point of origin. And and he looked over at me again, and he said, he said, don't give anything to the CIA. He said they want their hands into everything. They usually do get their hands into everything, and they get away with it. And I said, what about the FBI? And he said, no. He said that's all wrapped up within the Central Intelligence Agency, and they took it away from him. And he was angry. He was angry about this, and in fact, he became so angry he coughed, and he grabbed his stomach as if his stomach hurt. What I found very interesting about Curtis LeMay is that Senator Barry Goldwater tried to get close to the truth. Of course, that was many years ago before I met Curtis LeMay. And when I sat down to talk to Curtis LeMay, he was kind of apprehensive to talk to me about what I was asking him about. And so I mentioned that I met the former chief agent of the Los Angeles FBI, Richard Britzing, and he didn't know him, and then I mentioned a CIA agent who I met, whose name is Brett Merrill. He's now passed away. Was living in Long Beach for a while, then moved to Layton, Utah, and then he passed away from cancer. He didn't know this gentleman either, but I told him what they told me, and then Curtis LeMay started to open up and talk about what he told me about Roswell and the crash that had occurred. And he told me that he was aware that it wasn't ours, it wasn't the military's, the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, and it was highly strange. It was a highly strange vehicle that crashed, and he took over the office from General Nathan Twining. Nathan Twining never told him anything either, and apparently Curtis LeMay was not aware of Twining's involvement in Majestic 12. And by the way, Majestic 12 is real. MJ-12 did exist, but it does not exist today. The name was changed. The positions are still the same. Henry Kissinger is very well knowledgeable about what's going on. Henry Kissinger was in the loop, as I was told. And
who told you this?
a friend of mine that worked at the NSA, he told me this. He saw Henry Kissinger's name on documents. He saw George Bush's name on some of the documents. He was made aware of what's going on in about 1978. Reagan was fully briefed on the alien presence. Reagan told Mikhail Gorbachev of Russia about 75% of what's going on, and then Gorbachev became very, very close to us. I find that highly strange. CNN reporter in Washington, D.C., the second time that Gorbachev came to America, CNN reporter was able to interview Gorbachev and his wife when they got out on the street and they drove the security detail up the wall. And a CNN reporter asked Gorbachev, do you think we should get rid of all of our nuclear weapons? And his wife stepped in and she said, no, I don't think we should get rid of all of our nuclear weapons because of alien spacecrafts. Now, CNN put this story on for the half hour, the CNN headline news, and I heard this and I jumped up and put a blank tape in to record the next half hour. Well, that story disappeared, and you know who did that, who intercepted that. That was the CIA that got involved with that, because I know they were monitoring CNN and all international headlines at that time, and they squashed that, but I heard it. And this tells me that my information is correct about Ronald Reagan, and from my NSA source. And it's just total overkill as far as I'm concerned. And it's just Congress needs to know about this information. The news media will not put the real information on because they still think it's a non-subject until somebody in power, such as the Secretary of State, the director of the administrator of NASA, comes out and says something about that there might be something to it. Well, I had told him earlier about some sightings that I was aware of in Nevada, near Mercury, Nevada. Near Tonopah, and he said that the FBI agent was, his name was Richard Britzing. He's now head of security at the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City, Utah. And he had referred me to the United States Air Force office in LA near the Los Angeles airport, off of El Segundo Boulevard in the 405 freeway. And that they would be interested in hearing reports of close sightings, very close sightings, and even landings of these things. And Curtis LeMay shook his head yes. And the CIA agent, Brett Merrill, told me that he had dealt with the United States Air Force regarding missiles to try to shoot these down when they come into our airspace. That's basically what the CIA agent told me, and he also told the agent told me that the CIA agent told me that he was aware of the situation, and it's extremely classified, but he was aware of what was going on. He was a national intelligence agent. He said that we had several of them in Nevada, over Ely, Nevada, and other portions of New Mexico near Albuquerque. This was in the late 60s and 70s. I've met a gentleman that was in the Army, in the CID, that was involved with several crash recoveries when he was in the CID in 1947, when he was inducted in the United States Army. He was in the CID, and several of his friends were in the CIC, counterintelligence, and they became very close one another, and he handpicked a friend of mine that worked at Boeing Aircraft Company in Long Beach to become a part of crash recovery retrieval in northern northern New Mexico, and apparently he saw some of the aliens and witnessed the craft, and he was put guard around this crash disc that had crashed, and they gave him a M1 carbine rifle to to guard anybody that tried to get close to it. And they were given orders to shoot anybody without authorization. They recalled him on several other crashes. They had to fly him with blackened out windows to several of the crash sites. And some of the crash sites were very putrid to smell, and they had to back up about 45 feet away from the craft to escape the smell. He said it smelled like rotting eggs intermixed with rotting mustard. He said it was just horrible. Yes, I personally know him. He's still currently alive. Just one of the security guards that worked there that was working for the Treasury Department, and he left disgusted because of the low pay, and he picked up a job at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company because of the better benefits and better pay scale, and he knew people in the Secret Service, and even some of those people in the Secret Service know about the alien connected projects, and that the phenomenon is real. And I found that kind of funny because of they're not cleared to hear the information. They don't have the classification to hear the information, but yet people in the Secret Service know about it. And I found that kind of hilarious. And I interviewed this security guard at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company for about 45 minutes regarding the subject. He was trying to find out where there was one crash that occurred. One crash occurred in, he believes that from his commander, it occurred in the desert of New Mexico, northern New Mexico. And there was another one that crashed in Nevada, near Ely, Nevada. And the other crash, a total of 3, he didn't know where it was because nobody wanted to talk about it, and they were all told to shut up. Yeah, that's correct. They were taken to several crash areas in an aircraft. They were then landed. They were taken by Jeep. They were told not to look out the Jeep at all, to keep their eyes in one position. They were told not to talk to anybody. They were, in fact, one of the locations, one of the military officers said, he goes, "Gentlemen, we're not here on a Hollywood movie set. This is a highly classified mission. You're not even supposed to talk to your family about this." And they had to sign security oath statements that they would not talk about this for 50 years regarding the crash sites that they were taken to. These gentlemen saw, my friend had seen personally the dead aliens. They had almond-shaped eyes, darkened, rather large head, little bit larger than human head. Their bodies were about the size of about a 9-year-old child. Their hands were, they had 4 fingers, no thumb. He told me they all looked like they came out of a mold because they all looked the same, and their mouths were just a small slit. The typical description that's out in the field: real small ears, no hair in the head, just really strange looking to him. He thought they were probably a part of a genetic research, possibly of the Germans, but the technology that he saw in the craft could not be of German technology because of the fiber optics that were found inside, and some of the slide switches that they had inside the craft that we didn't even have, and nobody else on Earth would have that type of technology.
What dates were these? Did he give you any specific or just a general?
This was started in 1947. There were more crashes than Roswell, but people don't understand is that there was one in 1948, and there was another one in 1949. The 1949 crash was a rather large craft, and the people inside were a little bit taller. They were about 5'8" tall. And these individuals' noses were quite long. they kind of looked like the ancient, not the Sumerians, but there's a race, I can't recall at this time, but there's they looked a lot like an ancient race around Palestine, probably about 3000 BC. He told me that he picked up one of these aliens and put it on board of one of the Jeeps. And he said it felt like, the alien felt like probably about 45 pounds at most, maybe 40. And they put him in body bags and took him to, and for hours, what he told me, they took him to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base at the time. Later, they started taking some of them to Colorado and northern New Mexico, and then later on at Area 51 in the late 1960s. All crash debris and technology and anything that had to do with the alien-connected phenomenon all went to Area 51. These craft were circular shaped. They were not chevron shaped, and they were very, very light. 6 people lifted up a 60-foot in diameter craft and put it on a carry-all. And he said it was this really strange metal. He rubbed his hand on it, and it felt really smooth, like somebody had just buffed it out with a buffer. Yes, he said that he was, as far as he could gather from his friend CIC, the FBI was checking into this too. They were interested as to why these things were crashing, and they found out that the radar testing in New Mexico was the cause of a lot of them that were crashing, and high-powered transmitters. When they would get too close to transmitters, they would cause interference, like in 6 meters, or UHF high-powered transmissions. It would interfere with their guidance control, and they would just crash. And other craft that crashed, we had shot them down with our military weapons. That's one of the things that I do remember him telling me, that there's another alien group that looks a lot like the human race, and they're called the Orange. Through my mother at Boeing Aircraft Company, my mother's now deceased, and her friend is now deceased. Now I can talk about it. My mother had met a tube bender in McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company, which is now Boeing, and his close friend worked at Northrop. He was working on the stealth program at the time, and this guy is an absolute brain in mathematical, with mathematical figures and fixing things and making things work and correcting everything to make everything work. The higher ups at Northrop were dumbfounded by this guy, and they recommended him to work with the projects up at Area 51 in Nevada. And apparently he's been working up there for at least 5 years, and they inducted him into the alien connected projects to work specifically on the technology and try to figure out how these things work, to back engineer them. In fact, I asked him where they're coming from, and he told me, he said, I can't answer that. That's so highly classified. And another reason why he didn't answer it regarding where these things are originating from is that his son is still working within the connected projects, and he didn't want to even talk about it. But he did tell me that he worked on the craft to back engineer them. He's aware of their existence. He knows that I met the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General LeMay. He told me several times of the testing that took place at Area 51, that some of them come up behind the mountain and they just blink out and disappear. And then they appear about 15, 20 miles away from where he originally saw it within about 20 seconds and just reappear and do that.
These are made by humans?
No, these are the real things. These are the ones, the craft that he has been working on. And they go.
Who's doing this?
This is us. This is our military testing these vehicles up at Area 51
And the vehicles were made by whom?
by the extraterrestrials. I would like to work up there. And he said, you know, you're better off working at Boeing because it's a very, very restrictive and repressive place to work. And he said, you're better off at Boeing because the security at Area 51, they have security within security, watching other people, their other security people, and it drives them up the wall too, and it drives the employees up the wall, and that's why they have a big exodus up there of some of the employees that work there. They can't stand the environment up there because you can't do anything. You can't talk to anybody. You can't. It's just. He said it's horrible. It's a horrible place to work. Area 51 is just. It's just a horrible place to work. It's like working in Russia when Russia was communist country. He was working for Northrop, directly for Northrop. He was not working for the military, any of the military services at all. He was receiving his paycheck from Northrop. Oh yes, so does Lockheed Martin, Boeing Aircraft. They do trucking for Area 51, Boeing Aircraft. Hughes. Most of the major defense contractors have something to do with Area 51. They're not let in to what's going on. They're not even allowed access to S4, Site 4, but they do truck for Boeing trucks for Area 51. I do know that for sure. I found that out from a friend at Boeing that told me that they were hiring up there for trucking for some of the military sites up there. And I found out from him that he had personally gone onto Area 51, escorted to Area 51 from the main highway. He's fully retired. As far as he understands, there is an underground area there, and there's a lot of extraterrestrial debris down below Area 51 stored some sort of a containment area. But he has never seen any extraterrestrials at Area 51 walking around and conversing with anybody there at Area 51 or at S4. It's just the craft and the technology that they're trying to extract from these vehicles to incorporate that technology into our fighters and possibly some of our space programs. Just basically laser technology and sound wave defense mechanisms. Sound wave to blow up tanks, buildings with just sound waves. And some of the laser technology came from these craft he told me about. And we're incorporating this technology from these craft at Area 51. And I also found out that they are moving a lot of the personnel and some of the equipment and some of the extraterrestrial technology equipment and the craft to base up in Utah. He mentioned there's a base here in California near Anza, California, and there's another base in the deserts of I believe he said Tajon or Tajon. I believe he said Tajon, I believe. I believe that's the word that he used. There's a base near Lancaster and Palmdale area. And near, this is very funny, it's near Northrop. There's an underground area out there too that he was aware of. And but he particularly mentioned and stayed focused on Anza, California. There's some underground areas up there too that they're researching some of this technology and at March Air Force Base through Project Red Light. Project Red Light is a program to test these vehicles and extract as much information as possible from the alien connected projects to find out how these things operate and gain as much information to possibly uses for our advancement, for our, like I said, for our fighters and bombers, and for our space-connected connected projects. And it further verifies what I was told by people that were in the Army and the Air Force and people that worked at Area 51 to corroborate what's going on regarding Project Red Light. And Project Red Light is still continuing as of this day. He wasn't out of Nellis, he was out of Area 51 primarily.
Okay.
Northrop hired him to go up there and help the cause up at Area 51 to try to find out how these things work. And I believe he started in 1980, and he left there probably about 1997. And by the way, Project Red Light and Project Grudge, they're all intermixed. The director of Project Blue Book, Robert Friend, told me this. He was fully aware of Project Red Light. He formerly used to work at Fairchild in Redondo Beach on aviation and Rosecrans. And we talked for about an hour on the phone, and he was also reluctant to talk to me about the phenomenon until I told him that I met General LeMay. Well, and of course the CIA agent too, and the FBI agent. And so then he started to open up and talk to me about the situation of UFOs, and I asked him about some of the crash debris that was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base after the Roswell crash. And he had told me that yes, some of the debris and the bodies were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and some of the other stuff were taken to a base in Florida. And that shocked me because I never heard anything about a base in Florida, some of the crash debris being taken to Florida. And then I told him, you know, I know somebody that used to work at the National Security Agency. He had a top secret Umber clearance, and he also told me about some of the information about the aliens. And then he really opened up and started to release information. And then, you know, I said, you know, I understand that you wrote Project Grudge Blue Book report number 13. And he said yes. And I asked him, I said, where are these crafts coming from? And he told me he didn't even know where these crafts were coming from. All he knew was that the aliens are real. He's aware that they're coming here, they're penetrating our airspace. They're trying to become close to us. The aliens want to become close to us for some reason or another. They want to try to look like us because they know something is coming. What that is, I don't know. We are absolutely 100% aware of what's going on regarding this intrusion into our airspace, and that we're trying to get a lid on this to try to minimize the sightings, to quell the news media and the witnesses that are reporting these sightings to the news media, and to try to draw an interest in this, to try to push for a congressional investigation. And the Air Force didn't want this. They wanted to push this thing under the rug and continue to research this and just get a handle on it and try to get as much information and technology out of these crafts as fast as they could, and to steer the news media off on some crazy idea that these sightings were created by college pranks and balloons and meteorological problems, and they just try to sweep it right under the rug. And this is what Robert Friend told me, that the whole project was to collect as much information as they could, and a lot of the information was siphoned off by the CIA and the National Security Agency and people at ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. No, just the fact that he had mentioned that there were other agencies clamoring for control, and in fact going right directly to the president to get that control. What he told me regarding the security ramifications were that if their military personnel were to talk about this, they could be court-martialed, or at least threatened to be court-martialed, to get them to back down and to scare them. And other intimidations would be to hold their paychecks back, transfer them to other bases where a lot of people would not want to go to, like Alaska. Well, through my NSA contact, he was in the Army. The NSA is a part of the Army. He was in advanced intelligence gathering. He had a top secret Umber clearance. He trained at the NSA at Fort Meade, and then they transferred him to a satellite monitoring station, and he had received several transmissions from the Pentagon and from other satellite monitoring stations of the NSA that they were tracking ETVs, extraterrestrial. That stands for extraterrestrial vehicles, and this is the lingo within the NSA. How they communicate back and forth is ETVs. Other military services refer to them as bogies, or a long time ago UFOs. Of course, now they're considered to be flying saucers. He had told me that the NSA is fully aware of the extraterrestrial presence. We've intercepted many of their signals during the 60s, and we were testing transmissions to try to jam their transmissions and to try to communicate with them. And he had told me that he was aware of top secret bases in Colorado that were monitoring the situation, and there is another base in London that is also monitoring the situation regarding the extraterrestrials through MI5 and MI6. He told me that the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, was alerted to several events that were taking place overseas. He had handled that transmission personally. What he basically told me is that the NSA is fully aware of what's going on in an area called the Puzzle Palace. Carter was brought up to speed regarding some events that were taking place over in Iraq and Iran, where several near misses occurred, and some of the Iranian forces, fighter jets, which we sold to them, United States military aircraft, they chased some of these vehicles, and their instrumentations went crazy, and one of the fighter jets almost crashed, but he pulled away from the object, the huge circular-shaped object, and he regained his control of his fighter jet, and he personally handled that traffic to the Pentagon through the NSA. It was all decrypted. In fact, Jimmy Carter was not brought into the loop. They, for some reason, the control group, they don't trust the guy for some reason. They don't trust Jimmy Carter. They were afraid that he would come out and make statements, blanketed statements to the news media, and they just didn't trust him. They didn't trust Jimmy Carter at all. They left him out of the loop. But he was informed by the Chairman and Joint Chiefs of Staff that these events were taking place over in Iran and Iraq, and earlier incidents were taking place, and they're monitoring our war efforts and what we're doing regarding nuclear bombs and other experiments. The aliens. He went in 1974, and he retired. He left the military, the NSA, in about 1985. He said that Henry Kissinger was involved with a study group back in the 50s to study the ramifications of this information if it had leaked through a credible source, what would happen. And they were to do a study and pass off classified information to outside study groups such as the RAND Corporation and other think tanks of this nature to study what would happen if this information were to be leaked out or to talked about from credible people. as to what would happen. And Henry Kissinger headed some sort of a study group. Basically, was controlled by Majestic 12 people, the notorious MJ-12, which is no longer called MJ-12. I'm trying to find out the new name of this group. In fact, my contact that worked at Area 51 knows the name of the group, but he's refusing to tell me the name because it was compromised in 1979, 1980. Basically, it's an oversight group intermingled with the National Security Council and the National Security Planning Group in Washington, D.C. It's an oversight policy group like the NSA and the National Security Council, but primarily there's a group called the National Security Planning Group that oversees everything. And Majestic 12 is intermingled with these people, the National Security Planning Group. They have full control. They alert the president of what's taking place, and he either authorizes or just says, hey, you guys go at it. They have full control. They have no congressional oversight whatsoever. They answer to nobody except for the President of the United States. But they're trying to push it aside away from the president now. Well, apparently that's correct. They no longer have that much control over these groups anymore. It's like a separate entity. How they're being funded, I don't know. I can't find that information out. I'd love to find it out, because I can tell you one thing, the General Accounting Office, they don't know what's going on. They don't know where the money's going. They don't know what these groups are doing, what they're studying, and they hide it all in black project operations. They could say it's for research on why ducks don't fly that much or something like that, and they would just hide it in top secret programs. And the president's losing control. He's just absolutely starting to lose control over this. That's why Carter was not brought into the loop. They just don't want to release the information regarding the locations, where they're coming from, where they're originating from. And some of the locations are from Earth. There's underground bases here at Earth where the aliens have constructed bases a long time ago, before Columbus even discovered America, from what I understand. These areas would cause a major upset. In fact, some of the areas were already found through some of the investigations done by a television network called Sightings. They found several of the underground bases down in Puerto Rico. That's the kind of information that the NSA is worried about, is releasing the tracking information, because people that know how to coordinate where things are coming from, like air traffic controllers, degrees, longitudes, and where they're coming from, they could find out more of these underground bases. And this is why the NSA is really afraid to release this information. And this is another reason why the government of Puerto Rico has now fenced off the area where some of these things are coming out of the freshwater lake down there. And we'll just buy off politicians down there to get these things done. Basically, that's the information that the NSA is refusing to release regarding the tracking. And they also cooperate back and forth with the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization, regarding tracking and intercepts, along with NORAD, the Air Force, and the Army. They're all in on it, and it's all connected with a top secret group called Magi Control. Magi Control is controlled by Office of Naval Intelligence. It's a top secret collection group like the Central Intelligence Agency and the NSA. In fact, the ONI is just like the CIA. It's a top secret organization within the Navy, out of ONI, to collect top secret information, collect information on foreign dignitaries, foreign leaders, the Alien Connected Project primarily. It's similar to the NSA and the CID. It's all encrypted information. They have agents out in the field, just like the CIA, collecting information. It's all very, very top secret. Operation Looking Glass is a top secret program, project, which is ongoing up at Area 51 to try to see into the future, to try to predict and actually to see into the future, a time travel, to find out what events will take place in the future. And from what I understand, it's currently ongoing up at Area 51 in connection with Project Red Light. I heard this from a CIA buddy of mine, the same CIA agent that passed away from cancer up in Utah. It derives from the alien technology. He did not get into what it looks like or how big it is or anything like that, but it derives from, comes from the alien technology itself. The aliens can go into the future and find out what events will take place many years into the future, and they can also go back in time too. Of course, anti-gravity. Most of the craft operate on anti-gravity and electrogravitic propulsion, and oh yeah, of course, the aliens are at least 4,000 to 5,000 years advanced in our current. Back in 1947, I would say, but we have jumped so fast in our technology, of course, with their help. Back in 1947, the scientists would say, wow, these guys are at least 4,000 to 5,000 years advanced in us, over us. But now, I would estimate the alien, if we would say an F-1 would crash now, without any help to where we're at now, our technology, we would say they're probably about probably about 400 years advanced over us with technology, without any help from them. If something would crash now. Oh yeah, we're just about at the conclusion state right now regarding anti-gravity. That's why these cute little toys are now coming out that are anti-gravity, like the little top that sits there in air and spins. I'll give it maybe about 15 years, and we'll have cars that will levitate using this type of technology. Oh yeah, we're doing it up at Area 51 right now. It's, some of the stuff that my buddy worked on up at Area 51, who lives now in Pahrump, Nevada, through Northrop. But yes, we're flying vehicles up there right now, and in Utah right now. They had to have them up at Area 51, and they sent them right up there. Gave them the clearance, top secret CARV clearance. Bob Lazar would probably recognize that clearance.
It's called what?
Top secret CARV.
C-A-R-V-E?
Right, to carve a steak or something, or carve a turkey. And oh yeah, he's aware of where the aliens are coming from, where their point of origin are, and he's just refusing to tell me this information. It's just so highly classified.
Is he retired now?
Oh yes, he's retired. Well, I know that Lytton is, for an absolute fact. Lytton, Hughes Electronics, Optical out here in California, next to the Los Angeles airport. Well, McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company was at a small level. Now they're at a big level now because Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Company out. I know that Boeing is at least the transportation mode right now, but they will get into the aircraft mode year 2001 to help them out with the projects in Utah and Nevada. In fact, Boeing has an operation in Salt Lake City, Utah right now, so that's not going to be any problem for our government to pull them right in because they're right in they moved Area 50, most of the stuff from Area 51, at least 35% to 40% of Area 51 to Utah. Just basically those companies, and of course Lockheed and Northrop. Well, primarily people that work at Area 51, if they want a new 4x4, they'll get it. If they want special foods according to their taste, they'll get it. If they want pay increases, they'll get it. They don't have to strike like people working for other companies. You know, for a union or non-union company, they don't have to strike. They'll get it. Yeah, they live like kings. From all of the contacts that I've met, my final conclusion and my thoughts about this is that the reason why our government's afraid to release this information is because of religion. This would probably destroy how we see ourselves. I think they should start releasing some of the information that we have managed to collect on Mars regarding the face on Mars, which I know for a fact is real. In fact, I have another contact at NASA, JPL, that I haven't mentioned. I can't mention too much about it because he's still working there. The person that I know is very high up in NASA. He's not a director or an administrator, but they know what's going on. They know it's a face. They know that it was carved by somebody else other than us. The NASA, JPL, higher-ups and personnel there at JPL, they know for a fact, in the imaging area, they know for a fact that the face on Mars is real, and it was not made by windstorms or trick of lighting or anything like that. They know for a fact that the face on Mars was made from an extraterrestrial race that came here to Earth at about 45,000 years BC and set up civilization here on Earth and went back and forth from Mars to our planet Earth to give us information to further the race that they created, which is us. This is a shock to the human populace, and I think it's the big reason why NASA and all the governments, especially the United States, are refusing to release this information, because one thing will lead to another, and somebody will come to a conclusion that we were created by an extraterrestrial race that came to this solar system and set the planets in their proper order, which they are now in, and exploded the gaseous planet that which we call the sun. And thus God said, "Let there be light." This would be shocking to everybody here on Earth, and this is what they're afraid of releasing. And that's my final conclusion regarding this investigation and who the aliens are. I really feel that the aliens that were on the planet Mars came here and set up our civilization as we now know it, and they created these gray extraterrestrial aliens to watch over our planet to make sure we don't blow up their creation.
UFOs are as real as the planes flying over your head, and that it's time that the United States government started coming clean on what it's all about, because there are very important military and economic issues that have to be addressed. And how can you discuss a question which the United States government doesn't officially recognize as being on the radar? First of all, as you know, was briefed by a number of very knowledgeable people, including Dr. Stephen Greer, who gave me a 3-hour briefing on the people that he had assembled, the 400 contacts of people from all walks of life who knew much from personal experience about this subject. And then, as I went along, I wanted to talk to other people, and for example, I wanted to interview a couple of contactees, and they included Travis Walton, whose story was just, tremendously interesting. And I talked to him for a long while, over a couple of days, and was totally convinced that he was telling the truth. But you learn a lot from talking to these people. He had a heck of a time when he was dumped off 5 days later after his abduction, convincing people that it wasn't all a ruse. And he said the division was about 50-50. About half of his friends and relatives believed him, and about half didn't. It took him a long while to recover psychologically from the experience. Another contactee that I interviewed at great length was Jim Sparks. And Jim has been abducted probably more often than anybody else that I've talked to. And he was tremendously interesting because at the outset he would fight these people and swear at them and do all of these things. Eventually he came to the point where he trusted them, and they trusted him, and he got a lot of information. And he wrote a book about his experience, and he gave me permission to use one of the most interesting quotes from that book. It's several pages, actually, of a dialogue he had with the extraterrestrials, in which they indicated their concern about what was happening on Earth, that we were fouling up our rivers and our lakes and fouling up the air that we breathe with particles and really destroying our natural environment. And they're concerned about this, and they wanted him to tell the world about it. And so they of course encouraged him to pass the word along, which he's been doing both in lectures and through his book, but also to plump for amnesty for a lot of people in the event that the government does decide to open up the windows a little bit and let the light shine in. And the reason for that was because some of the people involved in what they call the black operations, the reverse engineering of the technology that came from the crashes and other contact with the extraterrestrials, is so interesting and so secret that certain elements of the United States government wanted to keep it secret even from their political leaders. And they've been working underground for years and years and years, and heaven only knows what they've accomplished. But in my opinion, it would be a very great deal. And certainly one of the things that I want to know is whether, in fact, they have developed exotic fuels like zero-point energy and cold fusion, as some people who have worked there have indicated that they have. Because this is the way that we could transform our world in a time frame of maybe 10 years or so, and save it from global warming. And of course, the other thing I say in the book is that even if that is not true, that the extraterrestrials would give us that technology if we asked them to, because they want us to save our world as a habitable place for ourselves and for their visits. In the case of the Roswell crash, for example, they still claim that it didn't happen, but there were witnesses of all kinds who say it did, and the cover-up was in fact a lie, and that's what I call it in my book. And they started working on reverse engineering immediately after that, and had some of the best brains in the United States working on it, and have had ever since. So the distance they have come in 60 years or more is I'm sure, incredible, and that they have developed probably spaceships, and they have probably developed exotic fuels, and there are all sorts of things that the United States people and the people of the world have a right to know about. And that's the reason that we should never give up until there is full disclosure. But this has to be done by Congress. This has to be done by the people who have been funding them without knowing what they were funding. Because it's not something that one person would want to undertake on their own, say the president, for example, because I think it's just too dangerous. But then once they decide to go this route, they should grant an amnesty, as Jim Sparks suggested after talking to the extraterrestrials, so that people will be able to talk honestly under oath and not fear the consequences if they have committed some sort of major or minor crime in the course of their careers. the blockage, I think, is really a desire on the part of a very small group in the United States to keep a lot of secrets to themselves and not to share them with either other people in their own country or with the world. And why they're doing this, whether there's a financial advantage to the United States or financial advantage to the oil industry, for example, of keeping the existence of exotic fuels a secret, I can't say for sure. But I'm pretty sure that there's somebody that's benefiting or think that they're benefiting from the power or the advantage, monetary advantage, of maintaining this exclusive little club that they've got, which knows a lot of things that the rest of us don't know. Yeah, I think they're benign, but there are, as you well know, several species that we know about. And of course, the United States government sometimes has told people that there's one species that is not, but they never say who it is or which one. And consequently, there's no way of checking it out without this kind of disclosure that we're demanding, because they may just be putting us on as an excuse for spending hundreds of billions of dollars to arm Earth against the extraterrestrials. And this is, I think, something that bothers me a lot or concerns me. I think the public is prepared to accept it. Certainly if it is revealed in layers and not all in one fell swoop, because it takes getting used to. I went through this too. You start out knowing a little bit and saying, well, this is fine, and these people are benign, and they've got a lot to teach us. And one of the things that comes through loud and clear from all the research that I've done, that they are in fact more spiritual than we are, that we're less spiritually advanced than they are. And so we should look at them not as enemy, but as brothers and sisters, and try and work with them for our own benefit and theirs as well. But I think, you've have talked to a lot of people who realize that at some stage this UFO file was turned over to industry, and the US government lost control of it. And ever since then, and it's a long time back, it goes right back to Eisenhower's day, and this was the reason he was so concerned about the military-industrial complex. He said that we should beware of them and keep an eye on them, because they would do things that were in their interests and not necessarily in our interests. And this, I believe, is exactly what has happened. That a small group of people benefit from this aura of fear. And you know Dr. Carol Rosen, as I do, and she worked with Werner von Braun for some time. And he kept warning her after he sort of mellowed that this industrial military complex had to have an enemy in order to justify such huge military expenditures when people are starving all over the world and dying from lack of medical care and so on. And he said first it will be the communists, and they had a good run at the communists. And then he said it will be the terrorists, and now they're having a good run at the terrorists. And then he said it will be the extraterrestrials. And now they're trying to get money to establish a base on the moon and do other things, which some of us feel is probably more military-oriented than it is scientifically oriented, at least as much so. And without really the American people ever having given sanction, they have no mandate to do that. No government has run on the platform of spending public money for the militarization of space. On the contrary, I think most people say, hey, this is a common area. It should be available for the utilization of all mankind and for the betterment of all mankind. But we've got this roadblock, as long as a small, well, I call them cabal in the book, who are the hardcore of the shadow government that everyone talks about, which I also talk about in the book, refuse to come clean, and I think that they're going to have to come clean at some stage, and Congress is the organization that's going to have to force them to do that. I think we live in an unhappy world where many things are going wrong, and I start my book out by saying I think we have about 10 years to turn around and convert from fossil fuels to a new exotic energy or energies, not the 30 or 40 years that all the politicians are talking about, because that, in my opinion, will probably be too late. And the global warming will proceed to the point where some countries are devastated, like Bangladesh, for example, which could wind up underwater, and many of the Pacific Islands, and maybe eventually Manhattan, who knows. And so we're headed hell-bent for our own destruction if we don't change. And yet you go back and read history, and I have a section on this, of almost every major religion at some stage has taken on some other major religion and attempted to kill them off, or some of them, while at the same time proclaiming in their basic rules that they believe in treating other people the way they would want to be treated. And yet in action, they do just the opposite. And I'm calling for a year of forgiveness, where all of the people who have fought others over the last 2,000 years or more forgive whoever did it, and it's two ways in almost every case, and then start cooperating in building the kingdom of God, which I define as a world where everybody has enough to eat, and some clean water to drink, and a roof over their head, and enough clothes to be decent, and sufficient access to education to give them a reasonable opportunity to be able to use their skills creatively. And this would produce really the kind of world that we all talk about and dream about and hope about, but do very little about. And it's interesting, if you want to go back to the UFO thing for a minute, that one of the early Canadian pioneers in this field, Wilbur Smith, who had access to information from the star visitors, as some of us like to call them, said that we've reached the stage, and certainly he got this from them, where we have to choose between good and evil. And if we keep on doing evil against our fellow man, in the generic sense, the world is doomed. Whereas if, on the other hand, we were to choose doing good in all of the ways that are open to us, and especially with all of this technology, then we could create a world which would be absolutely stunning in the opportunities that it provides for everyone. So this is the point that we're at, and I think the extraterrestrials are very, very interested in which way we go, whether we go forward, which I would say was the way of cooperation, or whether we just keep on saying, well, my power or my wish to be president of this country or to be the dictator of this country or whatever is such and so strong, and I have such a reason for it that I'll be glad to use armed forces to kill my enemies and lock them up if they get too powerful, and so on. In other words, the things that we've been doing and are still continuing to do in many parts of the world. The issue that is most urgent at the moment is changing the world monetary system, the banking system. And this is a long story, and I know you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it is critically important. The banking system that we have is, to put it bluntly, legalized fraud, to put it in bold terms. And we have to change it for the benefit of all. There are many things in my book that you will know from having read it, where I talk about the world being run by a very small group of elite people who are immensely wealthy and who want to stay that way. They want to have the stranglehold on the resources and the wealth of the world. And so they have introduced globalization, which really hasn't benefited anybody except them in a tangible way. And and they want to keep a banking system which has brought more than 25 recessions and depressions to the United States in the last 120 years. And now, after one of the most serious meltdowns, well, the most serious meltdown since the Great Depression, they're pretending that they're fixing the system, and they're not. It's just a pretense. And they're pretending to slap the hands of the bankers who are responsible for it, and it is just a tap in the hand. It's like finding a prostitute $20 for being on the street, knowing that she's going to go back out the next night and earn more than that. And the banks are doing exactly the same thing. They're just laughing all the way to their balls. So this is a profound area. Maybe it might be interesting if I could just go through a bit of the history in maybe 3 or 4 minutes or 5. I just go back to the time when King William was fighting a war and ran out of money. Somebody said, well, one way to get some more money is to start a bank. So he got the rich people of England to subscribe £1,200,000 in gold and silver and lend it all to the government at 8%, which is a pretty high interest rate for a government guaranteed loan. But that's the way things go. And then to show their gratitude, the government allowed the bank to print another £1,200,000 in banknotes and lend it to their friends at high interest rates. So in other words, they were allowed to lend the same money twice. Well then, over the years, through the greed of the bankers and the cooperation, use a polite word, of politicians, that ratio has increased dramatically. In the early years of the 20th century, the federal banks in the United States had to have a gold reserve of 25%, which meant that they could lend the same money 4 times. In my early years in Canada, they had to have a cash reserve of 8%, which meant they could lend the same money 12.5 times. And today, with this new system of capital adequacy, which isn't really adequacy at all, it should be capital inadequacy, they are lending the same money 20 times and collecting interest on it each time. Now that is just legalized fraud. And the fact that a tiny minority of rich people can get away with it, I think is a disgrace. So I've been saying we have to reduce that ratio of 20 to 1 to say 3 to 1, and reduce the amount of the proportion of money that banks create from nearly a monopoly to I'm suggesting 2/3, so that governments who own the patent on behalf of the people can print 1/3 of the money, 34% is the figure that I use in the book, and use that to balance their budgets and pay for health care and pay for the transition from an oil economy to something that would save the world from global warming, and do other things that are essential, like providing basic food and shelter for people all over the world and giving the poor people a bit of a break. So this is what's got to happen. And I hope it happens sooner rather than later, because if it doesn't, then what is going to happen is that we'll go for another 5 or 10 or 15 years and have another meltdown. And a few more million people will lose their jobs and their houses and their businesses. And the thing goes on until somebody really does something about it. And it's going to take a lot of guts to stand up to the banking industry, because they're a tough bunch and they would spend billions to keep this from happening. But at the same time, it would be the greatest service to mankind that any leader or group of leaders could do. And I just hope and pray that they will get at it, try and understand how the system works, which very few people do, but which you can learn in a few hours, and then make the change and give the world a break. My advice to the young people of the world would be, it has to start with individuals. I used to describe this sort of thing like a beach. If the majority of the grains of sand on the beach are clean, it will look beautiful, golden, and be very hospitable. If the majority are covered with oil slick, dirty, or translated into the wider problem, evil, or uncaring or self-centered, then you have a dirty beach, which is very unattractive. And that is much of what's going on in the world today. We have very little personal integrity. Every time you pick up a paper, somebody's ripping off somebody. The government officials are ripping off the people, or some people are trying to rip off the government by not paying their taxes or something to show that they're going in the opposite way to what we have to go. But this has to start with individual people, and it has to come from the bottom up, not from the top down, although I must say that, good leadership is very important, and if you can get somebody with high moral and ethical standards at the top, this will rub off on some of the younger people. But basically, the young people have to change the world one at a time, individually, and try to make their motto to leave the world in a little better place than when they found it. And if everyone does that, they'll plant a tree or two, or pick up a can or two, or do whatever is necessary, donate $1 or $2 for somebody else that's in worse situation than they are. And then, if enough people do that, they will then put the political pressure on the leaders to make the macro changes that are essential to change the monetary system and to stop global warming, and to do the other things that have to be done to, in effect, save the world.
One of the discoveries that emerged out of modern quantum theory is that so-called empty space isn't really empty at all. It's actually full of energy. So instead of being like kind of a quiet, empty lake, it's more like the froth at the base of a waterfall or something. And this energy is basically electromagnetic in nature, and the energy density is quite high. In fact, it's so high that when it was first discovered mathematically, it was thought to be some kind of artifact of the mathematics. But then as time went on, there were even Nobel Prize winning experiments that showed that this energy in so-called empty space was really there. We don't usually notice it because it's so homogeneously distributed. It'd sort of be like sitting in a bathtub with at exactly your body temperature. You might not notice the water. But under certain circumstances, it can be disturbed or perturbed, and then it has effects. As I mentioned, some effects on atomic emission, for example, is what eventually ended up in a Nobel Prize for Willis Lamb of Yale University, and it's called the Lamb shift. And this is a recognition that, in fact, this energy disturbs atoms, so atoms aren't sitting in a void, they're sitting in the sea of energy. So once quantum theorists realized that energy was there, the next question was, well, is there any way to tap it? And it was thought originally that probably not. It might be like trying to tap the heat energy around us. And you can quickly prove for thermodynamic reasons that it'll take more energy to tap it than you'd get out of it, so you don't come out ahead. But back in about 1984, a researcher at Hughes Laboratory by the name of Robert Forward showed that there was a particular effect called the Casimir effect. You find out that there's enough energy in the volume of a coffee cup to, say, evaporate all the world's oceans if you could get at all of it. So this raised the issue among theorists, well, can we manipulate this energy? Could we tap it for spaceflight application, for example? And there are a couple ways to go. Could we get propulsion out of it? Could we use it as an energy source? And so these are the areas that modern theorists are looking at. But one of the more interesting aspects is that if in fact it does look like there's a route from here to there, then we consider the possibility that, well, maybe there are other civilizations who've been down this track ahead of us. And so it opens up the possibility that you can't reject the possibility of, for example, ET visitation out of hand. Usually here, where Einstein said you can't go faster than the speed of light. Well, that's something out of special theory of relativity, and it really is that you can't take an object and speed it up and then through the light barrier, because it would take an infinite amount of energy and mass to do it. But it turns out it's a faulty conclusion to say, therefore, you can't go faster than the speed of light, because once you get into general relativity, you have some options. The options are to change the properties of space itself, so that locally the velocity of light is engineered to be faster than the usual value. The best way to explain how it is, how it comes about, is that it's actually the idea of stretching space, expanding space on one side of the craft and shrinking space on the other, so that you're not only moving forward through space. If the space itself is like moving forward on a rubber sheet, while at the same time you're pulling the rubber sheet and expanding it, so then relative to the outside environment, you can be going at, say, the speed of light along the rubber sheet, but if the rubber sheet itself is moving relative to the rest of the universe, then your net motion is faster than the speed of light. So the implication then is, well, if you can manipulate this zero-point energy C, get it out of the way, then if something tried to accelerate you, it would be easy. You would have no, quote, inertia. It'd be, rather than using humongous amounts of energy to try to propel you through this tremendous force drag that you get from the vacuum fluctuations, you could throw BBs out the back, I suppose, and take off like a shot. And so, in fact, the Air Force was sufficiently interested in that they set up a program called mass modification, in which I and my colleagues were interviewed to find out all the details of our modeling inertia as a vacuum fluctuation phenomena that might in principle be manipulated, to see if there was a possibility in some far distant future of reducing the inertia of a spaceship so that ordinary propulsive means could be used with relatively low energy requirements. And so they did a year-long study and went around to various universities and laboratories and asked people to tell them about experiments they might be able to do to determine whether our model was correct. So again, there's another indication that these are not just fringe scientists with science fiction ideas, but that basically these are kind of mainstream ideas being published in mainstream physics journals and being taken seriously by mainstream military and NASA type funders. A whole volume of space would be in a special state, so the pilots, for example, would not feel inertial forces either. And so under those conditions of promoting a situation in which you get rapid inertia of a spaceship, the people inside would, under those same space manipulated conditions, not feel tremendous inertial forces. Here at the Institute for Advanced Studies, one of our main interests is exploring the possibility of tapping or mining this vacuum fluctuation energy, zero-point energy. By the way, we call it zero point because even if you froze the universe down all the way down to absolute zero, where most motion would be frozen out, this energy would still be there. It's a very fundamental kind of energy. But we're looking to see if we can extract it for many uses, not just spaceflight application. I mean, the grand outcome would be that if you could use it to power everything from electric toothbrushes to aircraft carriers to automobiles to homes to space flight. One of the main areas of interest, actually, in terms of potential use that we've been approached by many people, is the possibility of having a very cheap energy source for desalinization, which is very hard to make antimatter in large quantities and keep it bottled up. But it has been done. Antiprotons have been generated in accelerator experiments and then captured and kept contained for some periods of time. So that's an area that I know the Air Force has been interested in and pursues research on. Sometime before this millennium is out, I'm certain that probably that will come to use if there aren't other alternatives that are simpler. I routinely make presentations and briefings to various branches of the government, I've been taken out on aircraft carriers by the Navy and shown what it is that we have to replace if we have new energy sources to provide new fuel methods. Of course, NASA is funding some of these breakthrough propulsion physics ideas. The Air Force, various labs in the Air Force are pursuing fundamental studies on these kind of exotic ideas. So there is a lot of government interest. It's getting to the point where modern theoretical physicists are loath to rule out any possibility. I mean, now we're talking about parallel universes and membranes of many dimensions, and I mean, the physics is just getting as wild as it can possibly be. And sandwiched in among all those alternative possibilities is the possibility that some of these concepts might actually play a role in spaceflight application, where civilizations, ourselves in the future, or maybe more advanced ET civilizations at present, could perhaps travel long distances in relatively short times. Of course, we see claims, and not just among the public, but among military pilots and good observers, typically in the military, that there appear to be something like craft flying around with anomalous behavior. On the other hand, in terms of some of the characteristics that seem to be attributed to them, and giving the kind of physics and direction physics is going, you can't rule out that well, maybe some are some kind of craft or probes, maybe even more likely probes and craft from some faraway civilization. Of course, one of the intriguing things as we start looking into the possibility of reducing inertia and so on, and then you see these supposed sightings in the sky which turn on a dime, right angle turn, and so on. And the reason we used to reject those out of hand was that it appeared to be there was no inertia there. And until recently, that was sort of an inconceivable idea to a physicist. So I think a physicist is probably pretty justified in saying, you know, that doesn't sound like anything I can imagine to be a craft. Could imagine it to be some form of plasma phenomena or whatever, but not a craft. And so now, as we get this new evidence that, well, okay, maybe inertia can be modified, then it does make you sort of sit back and take a second thought about it. But when you consider that our electromagnetic technology is, you know, a century old, basically, and then realize that you could have advanced civilizations out there that are millennia beyond us, there really is no way of saying whether they might have some other way of making contact or find other ways like wormholes of just sending probes here or whatever. It could be well beyond our imagination. The case that NORAD has uncorrelated targets that they can't account for. And from time to time, satellites see things called fast walkers, which seem to be energetic signatures moving faster than can be accounted for by known planes, for example. People of some credibility and credentialing are willing to come forth and say, despite the giggle factor for this area, we think there's something there that should be taken more seriously. Well, it's another mark that kind of an idea whose time has come to take it seriously. It should not be an area considered taboo by modern scientists. Here you have a guy who shows up before congressional committees doing whistleblowing activities, and under circumstances where a lot of people, if they could find holes in his credibility, would have been more than glad to try to destroy his stories and his credibility, and they didn't. And so then you suddenly have a fellow like that coming forward and saying that he has evidence from his own experience that there was crash retrievals and technologies that he personally was involved in distributing out. Why would a guy with that kind of background make it up? I had a chance to ask him about it once. And he said, well, the way it came out in the book is not exactly the way it was, but it's really that we waited until there were developments in regular American industry. And then we would salt stuff in that might accelerate those developments. It isn't that the developments got started on the basis of what we had, because we didn't want anybody to know we had it. You can't probably dismiss it out of hand, because it's hard to come up with a reason why he would have just made it up, because he's a very sort of patriotic kind of guy.
I entered college after high school, but I also went to work for Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. And after a year of employment in the regular field of aircraft construction and design, I was asked if I would like to go to a new department, or one that was already in gear, for a new project. And of course I said yes, not knowing exactly what it was, but I figured that it was in my best interest, and I did have interest in it because I got a little inkling of it from the person, the upper management, that had told me about this. Now, my studies had to do with the design, engineering, mechanical, electrical, and aeronautics. I was a pilot, a private pilot at that time, and still am. And at the time, what would it be, 1961, 62, I started my new job in what is called the Skunkworks. And I was introduced to the various divisions of the Skunkworks. It was purchasing, expediting, and engineering. I served in all of those during the 60s, and this went through 1965. Our projects were, of course, a contract special aircraft, flying aircraft, for the government, the United States government, and other agencies of the government, of course, supplied pilots. And I say this because it's important to the defense of the United States and the free world. Free world means those that believe in the opportunities for all humankind. The projects that I worked on were ongoing, and when I left the employment of the Skunkworks to go into the military, I felt that this is something I wanted to come back to after serving my country. I think it was 1965, actually, when I first went into the military, and discovered that some of the assignments that I was put on in Las Vegas, or near Las Vegas, Nevada, were very much in close proximity to our areas where we tested our aircraft, and a lot of commonly known as Area 51. We call it Dreamland, the hog farm, the lake. You know, this place would flood once in a while, and it was really unusable as far as landing and taking off, but that's beside the point. What the side that I know it from is that it is high security, and not really having to spend too much time in the area. I got a lot of feedback from people from my division at the Skunkworks as to what is happening out there. We're testing airplanes, and everybody knows that it tested special aircraft, such as the Blackbird, which I'm very proud of because that's my baby, and it holds some of the world's records to this day. Now, the thing about being in the military in that area is that they were radar sites, and we were attached to Nellis Air Force Base. Now, Nellis is a flight test, or pilot testing, or pilot training base for the U.S. military, but at the same time, it teaches and brings in pilots from other countries. North of Las Vegas, way up at the end of the northeast of the gunnery range, there is what we know as the Area 51. But across the highway that goes north from Las Vegas, is a site called Angel's Peak. Angel's Peak in itself covered the area, 51, covered the demonstration teams, the Thunderbirds as we know them, but it also covered a lot of other area like the Atomic Energy Commission test grounds to the west and to the north. Angel's Peak was a classified radar installation, and it's a lot of radar installations as we know them are up in the middle of nowhere. This one had a nice setting because it was east of Mount Charleston. So we would monitor the aircraft coming from Las Vegas into Area 51 or whatever passed by, and it was whatever passed by that became most interesting one night. In I would say 1966 to 67, somewhere in that area. I stayed on base most of the time and heard a lot of commotion about 1 o'clock in the morning. And being that it was the summertime, I thought, well, you know, it must be very warm. We were at 8,000 feet. The radar domes were at 10,500 approximately. And I decided to get up, and I said, wow, it sure is loud. The sound carries a long ways on these days. So I went out, walked up to the main road and up near my office, which has a short distance to the chow hall. And I thought maybe it was time for the crews to come down for dinner, but it was another hour. When I got to the area where the fellows were standing, there was a group of about 5 people. And they were looking up in the air, and I looked up in the air and saw these objects, lighted objects, moving at tremendous speeds. It's like what we would know as special effects today, and it was in the area slightly to the north and northwest of Mount Charleston. And Mount Charleston, by the way, is over, I think, just about 13,000 feet. So all of a sudden, I says, wow, what an aerial show. I didn't think too much of it because it's not something that surprised me that they were doing these kind of acute maneuvers. But right at that instant, when I saw these things making acute angles and traveling, maybe I would estimate 3,000 to 4,000 miles per hour, and then immediately making a acute turn, I knew that they weren't ours. And I had a special background with the Skunkworks, Lockheed Aircraft, Advanced Development and Engineering, that said, these are not ours. And having been a pilot, I'm thinking, what kind of forces these, if there were people in these craft, what kind of forces their bodies are taking? Then I said, well, these have to be guided by some type of intelligent pilot, if you will, and being a pilot. And I thought, wow, how long will this go on? So it went on, apparently, from my point of view, for about another 90 seconds. And then all of a sudden they seemed to group from what would be hundreds of miles in the sky to the east, or to the west, and they came into a circle, rotated in a circle, and then disappeared. And I thought, wow, what a show. So the security sergeant happened to be on duty, and we all looked at each other and says, gee, this is really something. And he said, well, we shouldn't really say anything about this, and just let things take their course of events. Well, I have a buddy that was the chief radar operator named Anthony Kesar, and Anthony was the first one to get off of the bus after the door opened, and I was standing right up close to the doors when they opened up. It's a military-style bus, Air Force. And I looked at him, and Anthony's a very large fellow with this blonde flowing hair and a jovial spirit, and he was as serious as anybody could possibly be, and he was almost as white as a sheet, as blonde as his hair. And he'd usually get a good tan as well. But this time he was different, and he took one step down the steps, and he looked at me and he said, did you see those? And I says, yeah, we've been watching him some of them, the fellows have been watching for the last 4 to 5 minutes, and I've seen him for maybe a little more than 90 seconds. And he says, we saw them on the radar screen, and we documented them. He says, they're not bogeys, they're not apparitions, they are real solid objects. And of course they would have to be in order to get a fix with radar, the kind of radar we use there, would have to be a solid object. And it's not that we tracked them with the radar. They would go in and out of the signal and register that way. And there were, I think he finally documented that there were 6 to 7 because it happened very quick and it's very real. So as far as the inhabitants thereof, we don't know. But the fact that they can perform the maneuvers and travel at the speeds that we estimated, and also as estimated by the radar operators and their scopes.
What did they estimate?
They estimated around 38 to 4,200 miles per hour equivalent ground speed. I mean, that's really quick. I mean, these things are darting across the sky. First, they look like a star, and then they move in any direction, triangle, or make any kind of a straight line, or just hover. There were, let's say, 5 of us on the ground. That's including myself. And in the radar towers on duty that night, at least 4, plus the officer of the day. And so, you know, there's a couple of handfuls of people. Now, when there's an occurrence such as this in the Air Force, most of us had at least secret, most of us had top secret, and then there's a few that had above top secret clearances. Myself, I dealt with the documents, so of all types, and for that bit of that time period in the service, it was top secret. The people that would record the information, all this is recorded, and it is documented, and then it is signed off, and then it is put in the archives. And our division, our radar squadron, was part of the 26th Air Division, which was in Phoenix, near Phoenix, Arizona. So where they go from there, it could be, you know, the Pentagon, it could be United States Air Force headquarters. They were definitely, I mean, the way I pictured them, they were bigger than some of the closest stars, much bigger. You know, I would say about the size of a 50-cent piece, you know, about, no, I don't know, about 10, 12 feet away. That's what it looked like. Maybe a little bigger. But like a silver dollar, there we go. And moving across the sky in a manner that did not leave a trail, okay? And not that we could ascertain, but they would just come to a stop and do a, you know, a 60-degree, 45-degree, 10-degree turn after stopping and immediately reverse this action. And there isn't any, you know, having been a pilot and a military search and rescue pilot, along with the flying, there isn't any kind of training that we can take that can bring us into a realm that can withstand that kind of a speed and then stop and immediately go back the opposite direction and accelerate from 0 to, you know, up to 3,000 miles an hour. When I was working with the Skunkworks, we signed an agreement with the National Security Agency and the National Security Council, as well as the CIA. And we kept very quiet about things because they always knew where we were and what we were doing. And I automatically had that team spirit, and we were a big family there, and I was very proud of that, having worked directly for Kelly Johnson. I'll put it this way, I'll answer you this way. Yes, there were new projects being launched all the time. And yes, there were new propulsion systems at that time. And you know, you understand that the SR-71, we took some great risks. And I feel...
Yeah, but that was internal combustion.
Well, not, yeah, it was, but it was very advanced. And some of the technologies that we learned, I was asked a question by a fellow businessman several years ago, 1997. Do you think that some of your, the technology that you incorporated into that aircraft came from outside sources, outside the planet Earth? And I says, it's very possible. But I says, you have to remember, we came up with some, we still have to make it work here on planet Earth. And yes, there's a good chance, but that, nevertheless, everything worked quite well. And the propulsion system that you're asking about, I heard that there were. but the left hand never knew what the right hand was doing, and for good reason. Again, they didn't want us asking questions. They wanted to stay focused on the projects that we were working on. I came in at the tail end of the U-2 project. That still continues, their use of that type of aircraft. And then came the SR-71, otherwise known popularly as the Blackbird. So the propulsion systems, yes, there were new ones being developed. From what I learned over a period of years, anti-gravitational, actually using the force that is generated by naturally by the planet Earth, is to repel off of it. There was research going on with that, maybe by consultants to the Skunkworks. We know, we can safely say that yes, there were some captured craft from 1945 or 47, was it? In Roswell, New Mexico, and yeah, they were real. And yes, we really did get some technology from them. And yes, we really did put it to work. And we can thank people in the United States Army to have the foresight to put these into industry for the benefit of the people of the world. I know this to be a fact. We put it to use, but it took us a long time to figure out what it was, and then figure out how we can use it, and then what to use it for. And are those products useful for humanity? It wasn't until actually later on in the 80s and 90s, this recent, when I founded a company called Light City Technologies. It was a technology development corporation of a secret nature. We work with data signals, avionics, computer, and as I had talked with you before, we knew each other from certain agencies of the military in contract with the CIA or other branches of usually called unseen industry. I would say that's a good term. We can term it black, deep black, or hidden. And okay, that might be okay for the popular, but having participated in it, and we still do once in a while, on contract, because we might get something useful that can save lives and save money as well for everybody, not just this country. The question that there is advanced, some people call them advanced races. Well, the knowledge that I have of these technologies coming with the aircraft or the craft that were captured here. I didn't see the craft, nor did I see the bodies, but I certainly know some of the people that did. And of course, they're passed on now from their earthly bodies, but there was no question that there are people or beings from outside the planet that have lived here for a long time. And it isn't just something new that's been happening in the last couple of years. There's been NATO research conducted, joint research, joint meaning many different countries, and it's been documented as to who those races are and their population at that time, and this was back in the early 60s. This is when what precipitated the need for our aircraft was the result of these reports coming out from NATO. These reports were started in the late 50s, they were finished in the early 60s and disseminated to the appropriate leaders of various countries, I think, but they were kept under lock and key, if you will. And the prominence or the greater exposure or greater occurrence of unidentified flying objects became, what would you call it? The objects became more known. And they actually stopped. They would communicate. We have records from 1954 that were meetings between our own leaders of this country, as well as a meeting with the leaders of our country here in California. And as I understand it from the written documentation, that we were asked, if we would allow them to be here and do research. And the statement I have read was that, well, how can we stop you? You're so advanced. And I will say by this camera and this sound that it was President Eisenhower that had this meeting. And it was on film, sort of like what we're doing now. Bringing it up to date, their NATO report gave that there were 12 races, and that the final summary, they had to have contacts to go to these races in order to understand who they are, what they're doing, and what they could do. And it didn't get into the contacts, but it certainly did verify that they haven't been here for just a few years, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And this is written in the text. Getting back to the technology that we might have used, the chips, the lasers, the night vision, the what we call bulletproof vests, and a few others. These were all used, these were all developed. The chips, what they call the central processing units, were developed in great strides. Now, why did that happen? Why you put a few things together and do a bit of research, you think, wow, boy, we did benefit. And in several talks, these people, it wasn't because they were necessarily sharing the technology, it's because we picked it up and put it into what's called the file cabinet. And we ascertained, like, oh, are these people safe? Are these people that have come in out from outside, are they hostile? Well, if they were hostile, my own knowledge is, and feeling, I don't know about all of them, is that we could have been, with their weaponry as it might be used, it could have destroyed us a long time ago, or it could have done some damage.
You think then that was, you listed all these devices, do you think those came from studying extraterrestrial devices?
Yes, some have no doubt. They came from the Roswell events. I know that some of the technologies that came out of the Roswell incident, the technologies meaning that which came with the extraterrestrial craft. And the reason they crash is they are, their guidance mechanism was interrupted by our radar or by some equipment that we have. I mean, it was quite by accident, I think. I don't know about that part of it, but even more validating for me was that one of our contract scientists for our private concern, Light City Technologies Incorporated, he worked with them. He worked with a couple of those technologies while he was with a very prominent intelligence agency of the United States government. So that was good enough for me, because this...
What did you learn from that?
What I learned from that, I thought anything's possible. You need something, let's build it, you know. And it isn't, everything has a physical shape in this dimension, or a tangibility. The ideas, everything starts out with an idea. It had to start out with an idea for these visitors to planet Earth. And maybe they had color-coded what we would call fiber optics today that could bend light and that could guide light to one data location to another data location. Well, guess what? We've been talking about it for 6 years. We have that type of technology now. The one person that I've talked to only outside of the military or the government level that would otherwise keep this out of the public view is Dr. Greer. And the reason for that is because he makes it the professional approach, which is more in line with the way we were in the military. Yes, the lenses, there were some actually what we would call the eyeball coverings that allowed the inhabitants or the people inside the craft that made the journey across space, allowed them to see in the minimal light that we know is now present during space travel. And we know that from our own astronauts as well as astronauts of other countries. These lenses magnified light, but also brought in a certain type of clarity. And my reason for mentioning this was that it was Earth doctors and specialists and interested in what's beyond all this, beyond the physical world, that got them into the removal of these lenses. I think there's a lot of this has been well documented by Colonel Corso. I'm sure you're familiar. Maybe you know him. You know, who was there with him? Well, there were a lot of people there with him. But a lot of the things that are said in the book or documented in the book by the Hal for Corso, I can verify, corroborated by the people that I have worked with and do work with now. So I can say that what I know about it is very true. The pathway that it took, that's another story. We talk about hidden technologies. Why don't they, or all these hidden things, and why don't they let people know about it? Well, they hide it from the public. Well, there's probably good reason for some of it. They don't, maybe the government didn't understand it themselves. Being in the Air Force, maybe we didn't fully know what it was. Take those technologies from Roswell. It took a while to figure out how they worked before we knew what to make from it, and then how to get it into industry. How can it benefit the people? The guidance mechanism were nothing. There was no yoke, there was no wheel, there was a console, very colorful, and they used their hands. And by the thought process, and by the way they moved their hands in rhythm with their thoughts, was the guidance for the aircraft. That was one reason why, if they took their attention off of what they were doing for their craft and put it on me, it might have upset the flight pattern for their craft. Now, it goes beyond just the way that they actually flew the craft, but what the meaning behind it is that they were trained to be one and use their whole being to flow with to work with the natural forces of what we call the universe. That's within the planet's sphere of influence and perhaps outside. This was very clear. And later on, after in the 80s, when we got in contact with the equipment from the Roswell incident, this is the way they discovered that perhaps the craft was being guided very much the same way. Well, that's about a 20-year spread, or less than 20. So this was just a key point. But we also have, where I live, my neighborhood, I find out that we have prominent research people that are working on what we called in the Foxbat, the movie Foxbat, where they had the helmet that says, oh, you think in this language and you think this and you guide it with your eyes that way and you fire it with your thought process and fire your armament from the aircraft. That's very real. It wasn't perfected to the point that the movie made it perfected, but by gosh, since that time, I think they have come pretty close. These are all available because we have data signals we worked on with our technology company. They have, in other words, the technology has caught up with the thinking process. Humanity has the quickest computer built into them than any man-made computer can ever approach, and that includes the Cray computer. Whatever we can think of, by the way, has already been done by nature. It's just up to us to figure out how nature did it that allows it to work in harmony with everything else. But the fact of the matter is, when we all come together, if we were to sit down to dinner, we would say, oh, we're from this country and that city and that city. Well, it isn't any different. If we're in planet Earth, somebody else might come from a different location, long ways away, but we all sit down and share knowledge, maybe perhaps share food. This is the way it really happens. The sensationalism that reporters and newspapers and writers put forth, it doesn't do the public any good. It feeds the desire for sensationalism in people. We naturally have a curiosity, but it can be fed with fact and truth, or it can be fed with sensationalism and half-truth, or no truth at all. How I came to learn of that NATO report, the research report about, the impetus for doing the report in the first place is because during that time period, late 50s, 60s, the Cold War was beginning, and there were ships, flying craft, intruding upon the Russian space, or shall we say the communist space. And then there was flying craft intruding upon our space, and we each was blaming the other, and in doing so, we were ready to push buttons, and we came very close to pushing the buttons that would annihilate perhaps both sides, especially in the war zone, or in that close proximity zone. And before the buttons were pushed, there was a secondary type of control where we call it human reason. It's something that machines can't do. And we thought, wait a minute, we can think very quickly. This is what I mean about computers, the humans having the quickest minds in computers, faster than the Cray. They assessed the situation and said, wait a minute, it's happening to both sides. Something is unusual here. Maybe we should do some research and then do a report, because we still have the weapons, we can still push the buttons, and thus the report. That was the reason for the report. It was because of the unidentified craft encroaching on one another's airspace. It turned out it was both same unidentified craft. And so it led to some very interesting information about civilization, how it occurred here on planet Earth, that these races have been present for a long time, and perhaps they're referred to as some of the wise ones that we know about that helped educate and help train people here. Having been employed working for the CIA and being trained as an observer, there was when you observe something and you follow the pathway, you follow it back to its source. And then you go back further for the reason. Then you get to the crux of the matter, why something may have happened. But then we ascertain why it happened. And I was studying some information, following the pathway on some information that had to do with NASA, that had to do with extraterrestrial visitation, and how real was it. Didn't matter about the sensationalism of it. That's how I came to know of the NATO report. But it was also through the military channels. I had to make some phone calls, and I did. And it was very nice to knock the dust off of those, because we can all say, wow, see where it's progressed since then, if we were willing to talk about it. We worked with the Central Intelligence Agency as contractors. That was during the time of the Skunkworks. During the military, I had been in a few different places around the world, particularly with combat support in the Vietnam War. That the actual work, the close activity was pre-military. It was with the Skunkworks. You see, the CIA was one of our best customers. And it's the CIA that has one of the world's best air forces. It's not, we have Francis Gary Powers, yeah, we knew him. Schumacher, a lot of these people, they're very real people, and they were often moved around by politics. And I think that we can learn something from all of this. We don't necessarily have to be, what would you call it, open, but we don't have to lie about it. We just perhaps don't say something. We've got to keep each other honest, and we've been doing that for years. The technologies that I know about that were removed from the craft, and I think my understanding is that they were removed from the craft at Roswell in a manner that was not known to the guards or the, I call them wild security people surrounding the area. Had to be done rather quietly by specialists. And I'd like to add too that I feel that I'm not positive, but I think some of this technology came from crafts of other crashes. Okay, not just, there's a lot made of Roswell, and they're not even sure where the things, went into the earth near Roswell, but it's near Roswell, I know that. And I wouldn't say where the other areas are, but it happened to be in the area of New Mexico. I do know that there was, let me say this, that as far as the validation of these, what we call these little beings, the engineer that did some work for the military was asked if he'd like to do a special project, and it was in New Mexico, and it was to build a trainer, if you will, flight trainer. And he built the flight trainer as a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer. And through the process of building, he discovered that he was to work with some other people. After it got to a certain point, the other people came out, and they were these little guys. Not much, kind of startling because they're all, short people, but very, very intelligent. It's like very intelligent children. Super intelligent children. And pretty soon it became like just us sitting here. And what they were building was a trainer for us to learn how to fly their craft. It's a very interesting approach. So back to your question, the technology. It comes about in many different ways. We refer to the crashes, the way Colonel Corso documented those, and General Trudeau documented those, and the input from our own associate group during the 90s. There is, it's the uses. I think more it's the uses where we can, from one particular technology that supposedly came from one of the retrievals. Let's call them retrievals, retrieved technologies. The computer chip, I think, is one of the best examples. The computer chip started out with computers, but then it became used in, video cameras. Then it became used as microcontrollers in automobiles, aircraft. I think they had to. They had to figure out what they were for. They say, hey, well, first of all, it's silicone, and first of all, it is. Or secondarily, it's something that looks like it exists in other realms outside the planet Earth, perhaps. And also fiber optics. Fiber optics went into these computer chips, and mind you, the signal didn't travel on hard wire as we know it previously. It traveled through a hollow core and in the form of light, colored light. And each color had a spectrum and an assignment to do a certain thing. Color, light, sound, form. So we have fiber optics that we put to use. We say, hey, what is this spaghetti that is in these craft attached to these computer chips, these silicone chips, and these what looks to be electronic equipment? And what is this metal that these craft are made of, or what appears to be metal? They did a lot of research. They did reverse engineer. They had to do some testing, yes. That's something that science does, and make it repeatable. We get these things, handheld scanners, that we can scan the body and determine what its condition, health, and also treat from the same scanner. Are these things real? Well, I can tell you personally that we've been working on them, and we have them cure cancer? Yes. Diagnose and cure. Again, politics. And God bless them, the FDA and other people whose financial interests could be damaged by the release of certain technologies. And this is not a weird statement or not a slam. Obviously, can it be a win-win-win situation for everybody? This is the way our technology development group views the use of technologies.
Have you been associated with that group, or?
I founded the organization that became, when it became a corporation in California. Yeah, I was associated with it 6, 7 years before, so that would be back in the 80s. We were contractors to the CIA. That was 6 years, working for the Skunkworks. That was then, during that time period. Working for the Skunkworks was 5 years. And the military I was in for a standard 4. Yes, there was confirmation. In 1997, I met some of our, what we called our expert recon people in the military. Highly trained and you know, we could blow up cities and terminate great thousands number of people. But they did an exercise. This is a confirmation. They did an exercise. They were hired by security in the United States is constantly tested. That's the only way you're going to find out if it's bulletproof or where you need to improve. They were hired, this group, they do asset recovery now for people throughout the world. They were asked to breach the security at Area 51, and they did a wonderful job. And they did it. And this is the one way I thought, how would I do it? Well, by gosh, this is the way they'd do it. And they went through and they disassembled piece by piece. And, you know, they could take out the pieces piece by piece, and it would send a signal and alert, and they could hide. And these guys were experts. They were expert recon people from the military. And they still practice some of their techniques just because it could stay in shape.
What did they find?
What did they find was that there were many areas at Area 51, and security is as crazy as ever there. You know, that says something for the security forces. And they're a little bit nutty because I think they're too far out away from humanity most of the time. And that's a personal opinion. It's not a reflection on the management. The idea that there is craft being worked on is not just an idea. Yes, there was craft there. I've talked to others that have worked on it. There's different levels there. What you see on the surface is not representative of all of the research areas that are there. But where they're actually located, if I were to, you ask me, can you take me there? No, I couldn't do that. I could take you where the hangars are and where the airfields are, the landing. I know there were two prominent people that, to this day, I still know, that founded what we call Area 51. They're two friends. I had no idea. It wasn't until 1995 and 96 that we were talking about all this, swapping stories, if you will, that they told me that they looked at me and said, do you know who it was who actually went out there for Kelly Johnson? And they named the names. I'd like to keep those quiet for now.
Okay, that's fine.
Because they're still related to, I mean,
They're still involved.
for the benefit of their families. Yeah. Well, they're retired, but they're still involved in, just by contract. DuPont, oh God, IBM, what is now, I think, Western Digital. Well, I've had business dealings with EG&G. They make products for us. They have made products for our corporation, our private sector corporation. They're a contractor. Quite good. They were responsible for the safe delivery and return of personnel to various work locations. But that isn't it. I mean, that's just a small amount of their work. He says, they're here, right over there, and look at the size of those ships. And it's obvious they don't like us being here. And what he went on to describe was like a lineup of military planes, only here's these craft and their people observing him, and he's observing them. Neil Armstrong. And he said, they don't want us to be here. and somewhere in the Wasatch Mountains, was trying to line up to take a device, you know, this recording device like this, and do research. They did. They eventually did. The guardians of the caves and the territory have been in the hands of the Native American in that area for hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of years. They are taught, they are visited quite often, as they said. These people are not, fringe, what I call fringe thinking. They're very solid. They believe in the Great Spirit. A very solid practice of treating one another here correctly, how you'd want to be treated. The caretakers, as they're called, are visited by these extraterrestrials. But there's some big graves up there with people 7 feet and over. Blonde-haired, red-haired, light-skinned, fairly well preserved. I mean, you know, where do they come from? I don't mean there's just one out of many.
Have you seen these, or did you go?
I've seen pictures of them.
Really?
Yeah, I saw it. They brought back still pictures. Not only did they do video, they brought back still pictures. So how they opened up these caves, they look just like mountains. I don't know, who knows? I don't know, but they got in there. Yeah, there's technology, weapons or things that can heal. There's spacecraft, so I'm told. But this travel stone came out of one of them where ancient records are kept. And yeah, it's ancient language. It's a root race language. It's whatever came before the Sanskrit. I think maybe Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, you know, he came pretty close. There's a lot going on in Utah. There's a lot going on everywhere. It's where I don't know all of the things. I really don't care. But that's where some of our associate scientists are. I know what some of the things they're working on. Their own private laboratories. This guy, I guess he was the chief master sergeant, a sergeant of sergeants or something. You know, the who's who of stripes. He came into the office one day and he said, I was on the commander's staff. And when becoming an officer, I'm still on the commander's staff. Comes in and he looks at me, and I really liked the guy because he had the depth of his spirit, you know, besides being a good military man. And I said, he looked at me, he says, "You work for Kelly." And I knew where the records were. Because we don't exist, and we never worked there, and the project never existed. And our conversations, this conversation never happened tonight. That kind of thing. But when he says, "You worked for Kelly," that was a way of saying, we've looked at your records. Do you want to complete your degree? Yes. Barry Goldwater was my sponsor. He was the commander's close buddy, but we knew him as General Goldwater. I'm very proud of that, and I served it well.
Do you know if Kelly Johnson knew of the UFO and ET issue at all?
Oh yeah. I would say he did, but he was focused on developing a job. There were 5 people in the world of his caliber, and there were 3 of them, 3 of that caliber in the United States. One was Kelly Johnson. The other one was Jack Northrop, who lived in my neighborhood. Kelly Johnson lived in our neighborhood. I mean, he lived across the Verdugo Valley. He overlooked the... he looked like a chipmunk to me, the greatest chipmunk in the world. They call him the chipmunk. In fact, the skunk, that's where the skunk, you know, sort of like a chipmunk, that was our symbol. So all of these things are tied together in some way, linked, but not necessarily everybody knowing each other, but were they all headed in the same direction? You know, we assume they were, but the right hand and the left hand and our levels of engineering, yeah, we knew what we were working on and what the probabilities were springing from it and future development, but where they ultimately were led, where it led and what would spring from that, how it was used. I learned one thing from an associate scientist, development scientist, somebody whom I have the highest respect, who was with the CIA. He says, the first thing we want to determine is who's turning the wheels on any project. He says, that's when we decide. This is what I did when I was with the CIA. He said, this is what I analyzed before I said yes on taking on a project. You see, who's turning the wheels? What's the motivation? Why is it being done? I asked, after we first talked, I analyzed, why is Dr. Stephen Greer doing this? I've done my research, some of it, or maybe a lot of it. And I've watched the happening. And you've been very dedicated to what you're doing and professional. And that's why I'm here tonight. That's why I'm speaking with you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here.
And we still have those contacts around the world that can verify a lot of things. We all have our agreements that we signed, and they're still, to be honored.
Right.
However, there isn't any reason why certain information can't be shared when it's for the benefit of humanity. One of the premises for founding this technology corporation that I did in 1998 was to bring forth these technologies that can help get rid of the toxics, that can clean the air, that help get rid of the need for so much fossil fuel, or help it become more efficient, that can help humanity in the form of education, that helps clean up pollution. I already said that in various forms. Yes, it is time. And I can tell you personally that it's already started. And I can prove what we have come up with. We can prove. The energy generation systems that the associates have brought forth deal with using natural energies from planet Earth. And there is a natural harmonics of the planet. It's already been proven. One of our own Air Force research members, I think out of Wright-Patterson, or Dayton, Ohio, pardon me, mapped the energy system of the planet Earth. They've also discovered that there are craft underneath that sand. Flying craft. I've never seen them, I don't know. NASA itself got involved in spending $10 million of our taxpayer money to go in and get a certain